Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Centre for Legal Innovation's Legal Gen AI Around the World series. This time we're focusing on the USA, and I know there's been lots of interest in this session, as all others, but I think we see the USA as a bit of a leader in this area. So it's going to be really, really great to be able to spend the time with our wonderful panelists. So with that being said, let me introduce these amazing folks to you. If I may, first, Wendy Butler-Curtis, who is the Chief Innovation Officer and Chair of e-Discovery and the Information Governance Group at Oric, Harrington and Sutcliffe LLP. Hi, Wendy, welcome.
Thank you, Terry.
Nikki Schaefer, who is the CEO and co-founder of the Legal Technology Hub. Welcome, Nikki.
Hi, everyone.
And Horace Wu, who is the founder and CEO of Cynthia Pty Ltd. And I hope I've pronounced that correctly, Horace. If I haven't, you'll sort me out, I know, at some point in time at the beginning.
So I'll very politely nod. Thanks, Terry. It's great to see you guys.
Thank you. Folks, I wanted to kick the session off by kind of providing a little bit of context and background for the folks who don't know you particularly, to learn a little bit more about each of you, but more particularly what your role is in GenAI, obviously the subject matter of this session, and kind of where your own, perhaps your own, but also your organisation's journey is at the moment in GenAI, because you know, it's running the full range at the moment, isn't it, across the world? So if I may, Wendy, I'm gonna get you to kick us off with a response to that one.
Okay, so I'm Wendy Curtis at Oric, Chief Innovation Officer, based in Washington, D.C. And rather than answer directly the question of where are you on my journey, I'm going to tell you a couple stories. So Oric has free available to the market. Just Google Oric Observatory, a platform, a tool free to the market that tracks about 700 legal technologies. I said to the team recently, and you can sort by what's the problem that it solves, what's the category of tool. And I said, and I say things all the time that have this result, which is total mutiny by the team. I said to the team, we need to add a category for generative AI. And if they could have tarred and feathered me, great American expression, they would have. They're like, every tool in the market, every company is generative AI. So one, we're in the middle of a market that is saturated with legal technology, all characterizing itself as generative AI. Two, we had a team meeting this morning talking about the tools that we're investigating, piloting, deploying. And we have 3 that we're about to pilot, and we had a timeout because separate and apart from the functionality of the tools themselves, in the last 3 to 4 months, 3 of these companies have changed their business model and their value proposition. So it isn't even about what does the tool do, but how is the company selling it? Are they selling it as a single point solution? Are they selling it as a brick and it's a, portal into all of these different bricks? Like, what is it? Like, how are they even generating revenue? So we're just, when we figure out where we know what we are and we figure out the tools that we're going to use, the company themselves change their revenue and business model. And my third story is our firm has what's called the 2030 Commission, which was started by our chairman to imagine what the firm's going to look like in 2030. And I presented this morning, and a big part of my presentation was on generative AI. And I said 2 things. One member of our team says to us all the time, this is an amazing time to be alive, right? The possibility, we're overwhelmed. Say every 7th business day around 6:30 in the morning when I wake up, there's a text message from the core team. I'm not getting out from underneath the covers today. Not getting out. So we were like beyond excited. And then we just want to hide, like the groundhog in the US, like we're not coming out. So those are my stories to answer the question, where are we in our journey?
Yeah, but it also feeds into the comment that we're all over the place in the range of excitement or desperation. I don't know quite how to categorize the latter category for you, but yeah, no, absolutely. And fabulous stories. Nikki, the Legal Tech Hub has been deep into technology now, deep into AI. Tell us about, what you're doing there and what the hub is doing, and whether or not you're under the covers or you've kind of jumped out of bed, I guess, as well.
I am one of those people who has said loudly to anyone who will listen that I am so happy to be alive right now, because This is such a tremendously exciting time, but I will say at the end of last year, oof,
Mm.
I needed a break. This has
Yeah.
been just a really wild time for people who are already incredibly busy with other projects and suddenly had this to reckon with as well, on top of everything else they had going on from a staffing perspective, from a financial budgeting perspective, and purely from an educational perspective. It has been a tremendous additional unexpected lift. So the exhaustion, I think, is real, but so is the excitement. At Legal Tech Hub, similar to the ORIC Observatory, we have a directory of global legal technology solutions. We track the market for AI and have been doing so for years. And since ChatGPT, obviously, have been tracking it for generative AI tools as well. And we enable people to filter by generative AI within the solution. We also have been working with law firms and with corporate legal departments on AI initiatives and speaking to people globally about some of their challenges in that respect. So we have a really nice ear to the ground when it comes to what's happening, not just in the US, but quite broadly. So it's really interesting to see the global comparisons there. And we've worked with a number of firms on strategic programs for AI, as well as tactical execution and use case identification and that kind of thing, as well as putting out content aimed at helping people to evaluate the market for generative AI solutions, providing procurement frameworks. And it's difficult for people because the ecosystem is incredibly murky, increasingly so now that you just really, there's so much overlap with these AI tools, both because many of the ones coming out do similar things to one another, but also because they encroach on what other legal technology solutions were already doing. So it's becoming very difficult to identify whether to hang on to something you already have if you're also buying into generative AI and so on and so forth. And to Wendy's point, we also have seen pivots, just enormous pivots, like very dramatic, from one thing to something completely different in quite a short amount of time, and more startups in the market than ever before. So it's a time when I think people need guidance and support, and a time when we are all learning together. And there is something lovely about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've kind of found the generosity and the collaborative spirit around this has really been quite exceptional, and we certainly at the centre benefit from that as well. But yeah, I mean, to kind of, I guess, draw out a thread from what you both said there in the beginning, it seems to me that it's not a lack of people wanting to engage with this. It's just that feeling, as you've just said, Nikki, of being overwhelmed, exhausted, and of course, always time poor. That doesn't help enormously either. But I kind of think we're also in a situation, and Horace, you're about to correct me if I'm wrong, where it's kind of not negotiable. You can't delegate the ability at some level to use some of these tools. So, and I know we'll get into that a little bit more, but Horace, before we do, I want to hear from you. And by the way, if you haven't jumped into the ORIC or the Legal Tech Hub directories, do. They really are an amazing resource. So Horace, over to you.
Yeah, a quick intro of myself and where we are in the Gen AI journey. So I know a lot of you who are on the course, so thank you for attending. My background is I used to be a lawyer, and about 2017, I went into legal tech. I started my own company that deals with language models. So back in 2017, when the transformer was first invented, we saw this opportunity to utilize the technology to solve things that couldn't be solved before. Now, there was a massive, massive shift in the market about a year and a half ago when we went from using transformers to find embeddings to now using transformers to generate text. And that was a gear shift. And that changed how everyone was approaching solving problems, because it made it a lot easier to solve things that were previously impossible to solve. And I sort of empathize with Wendy's situation, also Nikki's situation. There's a lot of noise in the market, and there's more startups and VC money being thrown at startups now, especially in the legal vertical, than there had been in my memory, at least. And so lots and lots of people are coming out claiming they can do all sorts of stuff. And so it's noisy, and a lot of it's real, a lot of it's not. but generally it's just loud. And so where we are in our generative AI journey is we've always been dealing with language models and AI, but we've been very slow at releasing generative AI features. And part of the reason why we've chosen to be slower than a lot of our peers is because ultimately we saw the value proposition we brought and what the lawyers were looking for weren't really solved directly by GenAI, at least not in the sort of core use case. And so we said, okay, let's settle down. We'll let the market sort it out because we saw there was a late mover advantage here. We don't have to commit as much money in R&D and pivoting and changing our branding and all of that. When we find something that is good, right, that's what we're going to release. So our generative AI journey has been a lot more considered, rightly or wrongly. I don't know what if it's correct. History will tell. But we've kind of looked at the market and recognized it is noisy and people are confused. And let's not add to the noise. Let's actually bring the volume down a little bit.
And Horace, for folks that are not familiar with your company, tell us where you sit in this kind of continuum. What is the nature of the work, if you like, that you do?
That is a very good reminder, Terry. Thank you. So my company, for those of you who don't know, is called Cynthia. We deal with, we create products for transactional lawyers. Essentially what we do with our products, helping transactional lawyers identify, oh, what's wrong with this document? What are the issues I'm contending with? And then once you find out those issues, how should I fix them by looking at the work us and our firm has done in the past? So in the old world, you would call this knowledge management. In the new world, you would call this inverted commas AI. So it's that sort of like contract analytics, contract drafting, basically anything to do with contracts in that like specific knowledge-driven sort of way. So that's what we do out of technology. That's why AI was a really good fit when we went into it in the first place.
But really interesting also the thread that you've drawn out there, which I know is near and dear to all of our panelists, is that increasingly close connection between AI and knowledge management now as well. I kind of think that's where it's impacting the role of legal in particular, or the knowledge working part of it, versus the experience part of it, and how those bits come together, and I guess what the percentage is. So I would love to explore that a little bit more as well. Let's get into the use cases. And to set this up a little bit, I think that people at the moment that have been experimenting with the technology are kind of focusing a little bit more on return on investment, on metrics, on working out how we measure that. People that haven't want those things too, but they are in that state of being overwhelmed or worrying if there's really a use case for them. So I wanted to drill down a little bit with this. And Wendy, I'm going to come to you first on this one as well. Is where kind of, or can you specifically at this point identify where GenAI is showing up in your firm? And what are the use cases? And it's a bit of a double-barreled question. What's kind of limiting their adoption or driving their adoption, as the case may be, in terms of those uses?
I think one of the best ways for me to answer that is to actually emphasize and congratulate Horace for something that he said. When we think about the ROI, it is not necessarily for every tool at this point in time in this year that you're actually gaining efficiency. One of the most important things, and on the way that we're measuring success, is that we're elevating the fluency of our workforce, and we're allowing and empowering our colleagues to imagine what this will be. We're also having open conversations about what it can and can't do, and whether we think that's a permanent limitation because of the way the technology functions or because of where it is in maturity. When we have a trusted partner like Horace, and they say, we are being slow to release these features and transparent about where we think we are, we say, Horace, can we please do more work with you? And I say that with a little bit of humor, but also I could not be more sincere. Because there is risk here. There is a lot of cognizant resistance because of all kinds of things that are happening in the world. The way in which you approach your colleagues is as important as the UX and the actual functionality of the tools. And we've been working with some professors at UVA in the business school to actually understand how the human brain reacts to this kind of change. So that's kind of a high level point. We built our own internal Oric chat, which is secure. That's probably got our highest and most universal experience because everybody in the firm can use it. You don't have to be a lawyer. You know what we all do all day long? As my kids tell me, I talk on the phone and I write emails, right? So huge success in using it to write a first draft of an email. So they're seeing the ability for it to kind of pull things together and do an executive summary, but at the same time, it's really verbose and sometimes is not the most efficient communicator. It's a learning, well, okay, it will augment me and not replace me because it can do this part of what I hated doing in an email, but it still needs my human brain there. So that everybody loves a little help writing an email. We'll all admit there's that email that we had to write to our boss that we spent way too long writing, right? This helps with that. Or the one you had to write to so-and-so that you just didn't want to sit down and do the heavy thinking to synthesize it down. Boom, there it is. Some common legal use cases that are already in high use at the firm is a deposition summary, right? The generative AI at its best is summarization. And then something that you would have a junior associate do 8 to 40 hours on, it's now 8 seconds. Still need the human, but it's incredible what it can do. Legal research, the ability to interact. We're talking about knowledge management with templates and kind of understand and communicate and consume it in a different way. Data extraction and then analysis, really powerful. Drafting anything. You asked where are we seeing it? We talk a lot about the delivery of legal services, but we don't talk as much about the business of law. Its potential and its use cases in our marketing and BD department, amazing. I have for many reasons, I dream of a future where there are no RFPs, and this is, hopefully part of that. And that idea about the way in which you interact with it. So we've done prompt engineering training, not because we think you need to be a prompt engineer, but it's again seeing about the way in which you interact with the tool changes the outcome. As the tool becomes more mature, then that prompting becomes less important. But it's also taking away the fear. You're asking what are some of the obstacles? 1, the tools are early. 2, they still hallucinate. 3, do they actually have a way to give a rating of how reliable the tool itself thinks its output is? But there's also this, is this the end of the universe and is it going to take over my life and is my species at the brink of extinction? And people laugh when I say that, but there's all of this discussion of that. And we as a group have really seen more and more, we're starting all conversations with folks, meeting them in a place of fear. And we spend 60% of our time and 80% of our energy removing the fear, then we get to the substance. So that kind of what's happening in the world and geopolitics and all of this, it's a huge part. And how much change can you take at one point, and how much can you reimagine your job coming out of COVID? We did amazing things, and we feel really good about it. And then we thought we were going to exhale, and now this comes, right? Anyway, I just thought I'd totally reimagined the way I'd work, and now you're saying here it comes again. So I think these bigger pictures or challenges are as much a obstacle. And then the noise. I mean, we could all have a team of 1,000 people and we couldn't vet all these tools. And then we need a team of 1,000 people in our security group to vet them. And then we need a team of 1,000 people to negotiate the contracts. Then we would not have a business because that's not the way to make money. So I think those are some of the obstacles, and they're probably all the other use cases that you've thought of. Another place that we're really excited about is the idea of extracting data that's about the world, I'm oversimplifying, but geopolitical or industry, and overlaying that on top of your legal advice. Because remember, in particular for the firm that I sit in, those problems that our clients bring to us are not legal problems, they're business problems or they're people problems. And putting that legal advice in that context and being able to see that real time, that really changes how we define our own value. So going back to Nikki's echoing, it's an exciting time to be alive. The being able to think about using these tools in a way that only heightens the value of what we do, that's pretty exciting.
Absolutely. And I think that horizon scanning that you were referring to, both at a global and then even a firm level, is something that you can do with these tools, as you say, and so many other pieces fit in between. Wendy, I just wanted to ask you a quick follow-up question, if I may, which comes always in this discussion about use cases. Where do you start with the approach on this? And I'm thinking about folks that really want to get into this. Maybe they've been tinkering at the edges, but they want to go full on with it. You've done that. You've been there. You're full on with it. How did you kind of get people on the journey, given the change fatigue that we know is truly well and alive?
I think the reality is we will be getting people on the journey with us for quite some time. And this accelerated transformation, we're following some of the same principles that we've done for all of our innovation. We start with those who it's most intuitive. We don't try to start with folks who are the most resistant. We try to get critical success, and that's loaded, but so that then if you are the outlier or you're the resistor, you look and it's not that's the new thing, rather that's the thing, and now you're the old thing.
Yeah.
We've tried very much to partner with leaders like Horace, who are being open about what things can and can't do, and trying to work with our teams to say, we're not going to bring you this thing that you hear about in the market where suddenly you can wish upon a star and there it is, right? You're going to get something, you're going to get a wheel that has 4 corners, but it's better than having no wheel. And we're starting to imagine what's the world going to look like when you have a smooth wheel going from having no wheel. Or the example, we are big fans of Jeff Ward at Rails at Duke, the leading thought organizations in the United States. He talks about the idea of going before or after fire. So you would never go back to a life without fire, but you still can be burned by it. So we're trying not to oversell, but I don't know that we're taking a vastly different approach on change management, other than for the team that's leading it. And I've talked to several people that you've introduced me to, Terry, and I will always be thankful for that. And Nikki, you talked about this too. Those who are driving this, the fatigue is exponentially different than anything else we've ever done.
Yeah.
We're always so focused on the folks that we're bringing the change to, but we suddenly had to step back and look at our own teams and make sure that we're really giving the care and attention there in a way that hadn't been such a priority, or not priority. Our teams are always our priority, but it just wasn't the same burden on the team that it is now.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points. Nikki, you've got, I guess, the advantage of seeing this in a lot of different places through, as you were referring to earlier, I'm going to call it the consultancy part of your business, and I appreciate you may have another term for it. How are you seeing the use cases show up in those businesses, and indeed your own? And what are you seeing as kind of driving or limiting it?
I think both Wendy and Horace have made this point well, which is, first of all, generative AI does not solve every problem. It is not magic. It doesn't need to be leveraged everywhere. One of the firms that I've worked with, we're looking at practice areas and workflows and identifying pain points and potential opportunities for generative AI. And even with introducing the core functions of generative AI first, talking the lawyers through those, and then moving into this work, about 60% of the ideas and the pain points identified are ones that you do not need generative AI for. So I think that's important, I think, for people to know first and foremost. I like to think of this as a Venn diagram, because there are different types of solutions out there. So I think of a Venn diagram with 3 different circles. One is for administrative solutions, generic type solutions similar to Microsoft Copilot. This is where you're going to get productivity gains in administrative operational workflows. So summarizing email chains, summarizing other documents and some drafting, but largely around more generic type communications. Then you have your legal specific solutions, and these are AI legal assistants on the one hand. On the other hand, solutions that are legal technology providers that have specifically built out use cases for legal or features in legal. And the third is the use of foundational LLMs, usually, as Wendy mentioned, through a kind of proprietary chatbot internally, often now with some engineering around it for implementation of RAG or fine tuning with data. And I think it's important to look at those and figure out, where are your specific opportunities? a lot of the larger firms are doing something in each of those buckets, but then there is overlap and you need to figure that out, and it leads to additional lift around change management and adoption. But I think a lot of people are doing something from each of those buckets, and it works. If you're looking at where to start and where you're going to get the most traction, or where you have a need, if you're starting from the problem side, I would ask, do you need, is your need something that requires a UI that goes beyond the chat interface? Because again, legal work isn't all best suited by a chat. Sometimes it requires much more complex UI. Does it require legal knowledge or data or information? Even summarization, although as Wendy says, summarization is probably the highest use at the moment in terms of productivity gains of generative AI and legal. If you're summarizing a complex legal document, you really want the tool to have exposure and training on legal concepts and language. Otherwise, it's much more likely to come up with wrong answers or less reliable answers. And then I also think you need to look at, if you are looking at a specific legal use case, you know, are you, when we talk about use cases, I think sometimes people are only thinking about using generative AI like Play-Doh to address a use case. But that's only if you're using it in its raw form, right? Either a legal LLM or a foundational LLM. You can also be using generative AI through a tool where an expert technology provider has already used the generative AI in order to build it out for a particular use case with sensible UI around it. So finding trusted providers like Horace who think carefully about this is really important. And when you're doing that, thinking about things like, and this is where the murkiness sets in, is this a feature that has been added on simply so that a press release can be issued saying we now use generative AI? Or is this a use of generative AI that is sensible and that adds tremendously to the value of the tool? So I think there's some strategy to how you approach this. There are many use cases now across the US, and I think globally, actually, they're not dissimilar from what I've seen on the operational side, normalizing data, especially billing and financial data around outside counsel guidelines, that kind of thing, drafting client alerts and as Wendy said, pitches and proposals, but also lease reviews and other kind of contract reviews outside of due diligence, because that does require very significant UI, transcript management on the litigation side. You know, there are a lot of active use cases. What hasn't happened yet, I think, and what people are busy with is building smaller use cases internally that really solve a core problem. I think that's where we're going to see very interesting productivity gains, or scaling use cases that got underway last year, but only with a small pilot group, and now actually need to be rolled out broadly across the firm. So I think by the end of this year, sort of mid next year, I think we'll start seeing some very telling signs of what this actually translates into, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, absolutely. We're kind of seeing the same thing. It's almost like there's a bit of an evaluative part to all of this as well, which is mixed in with ROI, which is mixed in with the metrics to kind of see where do we go from here. And I think this year is very interesting, but as you say, Nikki, next year may even be more interesting because we'll start to see some real definition around that. But Horace, I wanted to come to you on this as well, because obviously you're kind of a connector in some respects in all of this. But also the thing that I wanted to pick up from what Wendy was saying is that it seems to me that a tech vendor or developer's role, external to an organisation, has changed a little bit, because there is real opportunities for collaboration and partnership. I think in a way where we haven't necessarily seen it, or not quite in the same way. So I wanted to grab your thought about use cases, but if I may, on that particular point as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll start with the use cases because my answer is going to be the narrowest in terms of perspective. You break up the the legal entity, the law firm, into business of law and the practice of law. And then within the practice of law, you've got transactional litigation and advisory. We're looking at the transactional side. So we're 1/6 of the total picture at best. And so with that view, the way we think about use cases really is to look at not, do we have a use case for transaction for let me rephrase. The question is not, do we have a use case for GenAI here? The question is there a problem here that benefits from having a GenAI component? And when you ask the question in that way, then you start thinking about, okay, what's the cost? What's the speed? What's the scale? And then you end up and go, okay, maybe I do, or maybe I don't need GenAI. So the use cases where we're finding a lot of value, like Wendy was saying, summarization, fantastic value. Paraphrasing in different languages, really great value. Using GenAI as a sparring partner to inspire ideas where accuracy doesn't really matter, but inspiration and creativity does. That's where it really shines. You would not use GenAI to extract text. It's a total no, because you end up, even if it gets it right, having to spend lawyers' time going back and checking it. And that is eroding efficiencies. So we look at all these use cases and go, like, where does it have a strength that could not be done with other technologies more cheaply, more quickly, or better? So that's kind of how we think about use cases. And to your point about how vendors are now working with law firms, it is very, very different now. And we have a few law firms that we work with as development partners where we genuinely get together with them once a week, once a fortnight, once a month, depending on how regular they want to, and explore the problems they have, where they'll come to us and say, okay, our lawyers have said this week that there is a PE use case where they really want to create the due diligence bring down list of all the sections they have to like disclose against, etc. How do we do that? And we would explore the technologies, would explore, is there something you can do with what you have already? Don't buy our stuff or make us build stuff if something already solves it, because then you get upset at us 6 months later when you realize you could have done this without us. So let's explore what you have, and then if nothing solves it to a sufficiently satisfactory extent, then let's talk about building it. And so these relationships are beneficial in a multitude of ways. It helps the law firm find solutions that otherwise wouldn't exist. It helps us create solutions that can go to more law firms that otherwise would not have existed without this really collaborative relationship. And so we're doing that. I'm sure others in the market are doing that, although I'm not sure others or many others are actually talking about doing such a thing. And maybe Nikki and Wendy, you've seen these sorts of collaborative relationships as well.
Yes, but you are doing it so above and beyond what others are doing. We will see vendors approach us and say, we have generative AI technology. We want you to help us figure out the use case, without doing the piece that you just said, which is, but let me help figure out if there's something that already solves the problem. And I guess I would just, so you asked, Terry, like, what have we learned and what are my cautionary tales? Those asks of help us figure out the use case sound great until you realize how much time that takes, or your lawyers, and the impression that they can be left with. The person that you partner with, like everything else in life, is so important, and it's the people, then the process, and the technology, including somebody who leads under a strategy like you just described for us. That's setting the long-term relationship up for success. That's setting the law firm up for success. That's actually going to drive adoption of generative AI, even if it is to go back and say this isn't the use case. So you are more the exception, and I think there are so many companies trying to figure out where they fit and what their differentiating offering is. And I don't know about you, Nikki, but to have someone come in and say, let me help you build something or assess something, but first say whether or not you really need it, that's extraordinary. And I thank you on behalf of everybody in the market.
And it's your world, Nikki. Any thoughts or comments that you wanted to wrap that question up with?
Oh, I mean, I agree. I do think Horace's approach is exceptional. And I know there are other applied AI vendors, for example, in the market who work with firms exactly like that. I have also heard horror stories similar to the one that Wendy mentioned of, we have this Play-Doh, tell us how to use it in legal. Well, that's, not really the law firm's job, nor do they have time. So surprising.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to kind of underscore a couple of things out of all of your points. And one is, I guess, what we could refer to as the rookie error, which is when you focus on buying the AI tool before you actually work out what problem it's supposed to be solving in the first place. And unfortunately, there are still people that are approaching it that way. And I guess the other one was, you know, Horace, particularly from your thoughts, that integration is key. I mean, people really don't want to be buying a whole bunch of new technology, or to go to an earlier point that you made, Wendy, and I think Nikki, you as well, the change fatigue around learning to work with new tools over and over and over again. It's just exhausting. So yeah, I mean, true, I think, amongst many other points there. But Horace, I wanted to stay with you, and I want to get all of your thoughts on this as well. It seems to be the year of large language models in a way, small language models too, but the year of large language models. And I guess obviously what comes with that, and you have all been speaking about this, is trying to work out, do you build or do you buy? What's going to work out best for you? So I'm just wondering if you could, Horace, tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of influencing people's choices. Obviously, integration and the ability to kind of use what you've got being understood, but that or any other comments that you'd like to provide for us there.
And it's very much based on limited evidence. From what I've seen, it depends on what the law firm started with. If the law firm started with a lot of legacy software that they happen to be at the right time to transition from, then that opens up the opportunity to explore build, buy, or the possible options. If the law firm's already bought into certain things and they have to make sure they get an ROI, then it's really about leveraging what they've already got and then perhaps building small little things that are not available in the market to boost the performance of what they've already got. And I know one firm, for example, made a very strategic choice to say, we are not going to build anything ourselves. We are going to select the vendors that we think are going to bring something to the table, work with them to make sure that we get what we need. And so I think, depends on the law firm. It depends on who's in charge, depends on their appetite. I can't speak more generally about what drives that decision, and I'm going to defer to people who are wiser and have more direct insight than I do. So I'll throw back at you, Terry, to kind of redirect that question.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get your thoughts, Nikki and Wendy, but Nikki, what are you seeing on that, the build or buy question, I guess?
I mean, I think so. Last year, and I think this is true, when people were talking about this build or buy, they were talking about it as though this was the same equation that it has been for the past 10 years, which is, you know, build meaning an actual significant lift to build your own technology effectively. But that's not what people were really doing last year. What they were doing is deploying foundational LLMs through an API. That to me is a different strategic decision to the traditional dichotomy of build versus buy, where there is just much more lift on the build side. Last year, it made sense to build in that way, to deploy in that way, because you were providing your lawyers and professionals with a safe environment to experiment with technology that was brand new and that they were all clamoring to use, which was necessary for a number of reasons. I still think that is true, especially for firms that are starting out. However, I think we are moving into a different phase too, with AI agents and smaller models. We are now seeing much more nuanced builds, and also with partnerships with applied AI providers actually addressing core problems and building out solutions that are custom for a particular firm. And I think there, it really does come back to the old framework. This is technology like any other. I mean, it's not like any other technology, but the same principles apply. You know, is there a competitive edge that you will get from building that you could not get otherwise, either because this is not available elsewhere in the market, or you can build something manifestly better and it is of high value to your firm and your leadership in competitive areas. So I think it really does come down to that now when you're talking about higher lift builds, as it were.
I am so glad that you kind of alluded to the fact that the definition of build and buy has changed. Because I think I used to always think that build was starting from scratch. And that definition, as you say, has now changed. It's like a build on is probably
Right.
the way that I would describe it, right? And buying used to be when you would buy a product that was already available that you could customize in
finish.
some ways. Exactly. So it's really interesting that that definition has kind of changed. But the other thing that you mentioned there, which I thought was really interesting, this kind of, I don't know, deployment in a way of AI agents to me is also changing the technology being predominantly inward facing to now kind of opening up the opportunity, just opening at the moment, that opportunity to being outward facing as well, isn't it? We've seen at least one law firm in the US do that, where they're now offering a product which is using the technology but offering it at a fixed fee. So to me, that's the other interesting kind of move. Do you think, are they fair comments, Nikki?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll see more of that. Especially if we do see, and I don't know if we'll have time to discuss this here, but I think it's one of the most interesting questions is if we do start to see some business model change, then I think firms do need to be thinking about where are the adjacent markets that they can play. And this technology does make some interesting things possible for firms that have the technology resources. I mean, I'm very curious to know what Wendy thinks about this working in a firm now and probably undergoing these strategic decisions, but there is a huge technology debt you can also acquire by building. So you need to know you have the budget for it, you have the resources for it, either internal or external. And and of course you're supporting an external product that increases manifestly also around, do you have the capabilities to sell products rather than services and to market them effectively, and all of that kind of thing requires resourcing, but it's a great competitive advantage if you can go there feasibly.
Would love to hear your thoughts on that, Wendy. I've often thought with Oric, they're kind of the closest law firm expansion to my mind, the way that I look at it, as kind of almost being that merger between a law tech or legal tech company and a law firm, and the multiple service offerings, albeit, under different companies perhaps, that are available from that. And I'm just thinking about the amazing work that you have done, both in funding or supporting, as well as what I would call the more traditional kind of income streams, and obviously the business services parts as well. So however you would like to answer that or build on that in terms of the build buy, but also perhaps how is that opportunity influencing the growth and business model of your firm?
So we stopped calling it build versus buy, and we call it build, buy, or modify. So that's how we've talked about it. And what Nikki and Horace and everyone has said, right? It used to be you built from scratch, or you bought something off the shelf and you deployed it. And now there's this middle zone, which I think is going to be more and more the way that we do things, including in enterprise tech, like you were saying, Horace, but then you modify it for a particular use case. That also changes the talent and the interaction between the teams, which gets complicated, and we can talk about in a minute. But what you raised, Nikki, is what we're all most excited about. Like, what is the untapped market? And there's that, I think it's a McKinsey statistic or somebody else of equal prestige that says it's at a $3 trillion untapped legal market for the average consumer. So on my desk, which I just grabbed, the book that I'm reading, I don't know if everyone knows this one, Unicorn Within, Linda Yates. But there's all kinds of fascinating things. This is the Harvard Business Review. But she makes the point that you made, Nikki, that as the incumbent, we have the potential to be the ultimate disruptor. We also have the potential to crash and burn for the reasons that you can probably expect, including the business as usual. But this is what we're thinking about. I mentioned that I talked to our 2030 commission this morning, and I talked about, you have to reimagine who we are. And there are two examples that I really like to use. In New York City, it's the most expensive and valuable thing you have, real estate. Restaurants don't open until noon. I don't know if you all know this, but I forget, this is over a decade old, but innovation. there was an app that allowed you to find a restaurant where you could store your luggage between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m., right? Using the resource that you have that you're not leveraging in the way that you should. So what is it? What is our thing? Second, how do we think about our customer experience? So in the US, we have Costco, which is kind of our biggest day-to-day consumer store, where it's everything from you buy your apples to your socks to a couch. But you're thinking about the big box store experience. Then they started selling vacations. Would you go to Target to buy your vacation? Then they started selling diamonds. Like, would I go to buy my diamonds from the place that I bought my bulk peanuts? Apparently so. Most recently, they're selling gold bars. So I said, to our, like, what are our gold bars? Like, what is that thing that we're not realizing that the customer experience, something about coming to Oric, something about coming to Costco, our brand, the trust, the ease, whatever it is that we should be doing the other thing. Now, somebody's got to figure out that idea, Nikki. I haven't figured it out yet. But
I think if anyone does, it will be you, Wendy.
our team is ready for our colleagues to think of that and go. So I think I was asked about build buy. It's build buy or modify at Oric. The potential to change the market, change the business model, and have an entirely different customer or adjacent market. 100%. Whoever figures this out, it'll be extraordinary. And I actually hope that not only is it great fiscal success, but there's a reason why they're all the lawyer jokes. It's not easy to get to us. We can be hard to get a straight answer. There's not a lot of transparency in the cost. We feel like in many ways the assumption is if you bring a lawyer in, they make it harder, not easier. Imagine if it's just the opposite. I have a legal problem. The first person I want to go to is the lawyer because the experience is so great. This is what I dream of, because when you work with purpose, you find more satisfaction. When your customer or your client is happy, you feel better about the work that you did, the sacrifices that you made, the intensity with what you work. So going back to where Nikki and I started, it's a great time to be alive. Yes. But am I going to share my $1 million trillion idea? Maybe with Nikki, but I'm not going to announce it here.
Oh,
and I don't have it yet.
That's such a shame, Wendy. I was going to
I
tell you my
know.
$1 billion idea.
But it's true, but it speaks to that really important part of experimentation, doesn't it? You've got to be doing that right now. I mean, you're just not going to be able to compete if you're not. And the way that I sometimes think about this or articulate it is that Laura's often thought that other industries are adjacent to it. We are now adjacent to other industries, and I think that's a monumental mindset shift for us in a way. Wendy, I wanted to stay with you and ask you this question. We've all kind of been pointing in this direction, but this one around capabilities, around talent, if you like. And as I sit in Australia, I can say to you, there is no doubt that we are definitely feeling a skills shortage at this point in time. We just don't have enough skilled talent, not in the case of tech or AI, that's dire, because obviously that can be sourced globally, clearly and perhaps more easily. But, I mean, like on the ground, in law firms, in legal departments, needing to work in a multidisciplinary team or environment, but not necessarily having people that we can find. And of course, the price of talent now rising quite significantly and understandably as a result of that. So Wendy, the question to you is this, because you mentioned earlier that you'd been really focused on very directed education, in the case initially of prompt engineering. How are you preparing your current workforce in your firm to get ready for this? Because a lot of people are asking that question. And I guess if you want to venture a few thoughts, what should we be doing in education more broadly in the legal world?
I'll take the corporate structure and then the
Sure.
law separately. So we were, I believe, the first law firm in the US to hire a chief data and digital transformation officer. And it's to this very point, like we have to have one of our most senior leaders thinking about the technology change, right? So the digital experience, but also the skill set and the fluency. And in many ways, we were so early, and now we feel like we can't race fast enough to do this. So it's got to be a critical strategic priority, I think, for every organization, regardless of industry. And it's a different talent, and it's resource intensive, at least initially. And there are some great providers that have curriculum, but I think you have to meet people where they are in your own language, in your own use cases, in your own organization to drive that change. Law schools, I think many people, including you, Terry, have been calling for a change in legal education for a long time. Our summer class just started, and we just did our hackathon, which we do at the beginning with our summers, and we have them hack a couple issues. But they came to us with more focus and clarity about the gaps in their education, but translating it into a different expectation of what their career is going to be. The law students in many ways are, you worry that you get that continued education, and so you can't see what the change will be. And I guess because of all the things that we're talking about, they're saying the law schools are behind, and we can tell our career will be vastly different in a way that I've never seen it. So clear, so passionate. This generation, the folks who are going through law school, since November of 22 forward, I think are going to drive a faster change than anything else we've seen before. And that's really exciting to me. In some ways, I felt like we were often pulling even the most junior lawyers with us, and that's not going to be the case. The best way I hope to help the law schools are what we're all doing here, and it's in participating in organizations like this and offering help. But in fairness to the law school, we know it's different skills, but I think we're all figuring out exactly what those skills are. And if we could get to the skills that we were talking about 7 years ago, which were project management, people management, and understanding the business, while we figure out this other highly technical piece. But there was a meeting in the US of a lot of group of large law firm leaders recently, and I understand that there was big debate about when we hit a point of maturity, are we really going to be hiring technologist lawyers? Or in fact, because the technology does so much for us, we're actually going to be doubling down on the lawyer skills and the people skills. And Jeff Ward, who leads Rails in the US, talks a lot about the importance to have the agility rather than the aptitude. What differentiates you as a successful lawyer? So I don't have all the answers, Terry, but just when I thought the tide couldn't rise any higher, it's going higher. But I do believe in many ways maybe we're rising more together. Anything I can do to help, because the other thing is the cost, in particular in the US, of legal education.
Yeah.
That I want every lawyer who graduates to have exceptional value and to be passionate about the career that they have and not feel burdened with this huge debt and a skill that doesn't translate into job security. That's terrifying. And it goes to the regulatory changes, which also means we need one national bar exam. Right? We have all these very protectionistic regulatory schemes in the US that hurt our law students or our new lawyers as well.
It is a massive ship to turn around. It's the world in which I live, or have feet, I guess, in a bunch of different places, but it is a really big one to turn around. But to me, it's one that's not negotiable. We have to turn it around because it's just a different world. But I wanted to quickly, because I've got one more question that I wanted to pose to you, but Nikki and Horace, just get your thoughts about that. And if I can throw one little bit into that as well, this discussion that we've got very much alive in the US, particularly about mandating a tech competency, doesn't exist everywhere in the world. But does that help or hinder the sorts of things that Wendy was speaking to? Nikki, if I could come to you quickly with that one, and Horace as well.
To take your last point first, I think that's really interesting. I have used that tech competency obligation in so many law school lectures and presentations in law firms, and I don't know that it lands. I don't know that it has teeth. I wish it had. Perhaps we'll see it have more of an impact. But I think this now is having the desired impact, more so than any sort of obligation, and because that obligation as well can be interpreted in various ways. I've seen it interpreted in some very peculiar ways. Something that Wendy said earlier, I thought was such a lovely way of expressing it, elevating the fluency of your workforce. I think that is really key. That's really where we are. And for me as well, it is about teaching skills now, but it's mostly about teaching an openness and a nimbleness to respond to a changing environment, because prompt engineering, I think, is really critical for people to understand conceptually, because it teaches you about the way that this technology works, not because you will actually have to do the prompting for terribly much longer. In the well-designed legal tools, this will sit in the back end predominantly. But there will still be tools where you do have a chat interface, and understanding how this works and that there are differences in how it works will be important. But we don't know what is around the corner. Things are changing so rapidly that I think the key for firms as well is this is not a once and done educational programming. This is continuous education, and also educating your professionals on the fact that this is not a 12-week course and then that's it, you know everything there is about generative AI. Helping them know, not just in their work lives, frankly, but also in their personal lives, things are going to continue to evolve and shift, and learning is part of being a professional now, I think, in almost any industry, but maybe in legal in particular.
And I think investing in it, Nikki, because, you know, you often see in the numerous surveys and research coming out that people acknowledge the need for the development of capabilities, but there's not a matching understanding of the need to invest and make resources available to do that. Horace, a quick word to you, and then I'm going to wrap with one final question, if I may.
I'll make mine very quick, but I do have one story I want to share.
Yeah.
So I met up with the Dean of Queenstown University Law School, John Swinson, a couple of weeks ago, who was visiting New York, and we were talking about how the capability of GenAI now is so incredible that he would consider it to be as competent as a well-trained third-year lawyer. Now, that assumes a lot has gone right with the technology, but let's assume it has.
Yeah.
And because it's so compelling, because it writes so well, unless you have the capability that is above a third-year lawyer, you're not going to know when it's wrong. You're going to be very convinced by what it's giving you if you were a second-year lawyer or less, to go, yeah, I'm just going to hand this to the partner because it sounds so right. And the biggest challenge now is, how do you close that gap between a 0 to 3 years so that your junior lawyers are not just going to be a mailbox? They're actually going to be able to critically analyze the piece of writing to decide, is it good, is it bad, make improvements before handing it to the internal client. And he considers that one of the biggest training gaps that we all have to overcome, both in the education sector and the professional sector. So this all ties back into the capability of the software potentially is so great that now it leaves a gap for us as people to fill in, to make sure people are performing and the work is still being delivered.
And a huge impact on recruitment as well, and how that works. I've got to wrap with this final question, and I'm asking all of the folks that I speak to in this series the same question, and that is, what is unique in the USA in terms of the Gen AI market? All of you work internationally, so I know that you can look at it from that perspective. But Nikki, I wanted to start with you on that one.
Last year, the US was lucky because we had a provider out of the gate that had built up trust in the legal ecosystem with case text, and that also had existing infrastructure around neural networks and a very solid body of legal content. So that's one answer, is that we were in a, I think, fortunate position from an adoption perspective. But I think the more interesting answer is, and this is as someone who is not from the US originally, the United States is a hugely entrepreneurial country. It is also a country of optimists, predominantly, I would say. There is a very sort of outgoing, optimistic approach to things, generally speaking. And I think those two things, and it is a huge market. It's a huge market. So, and it's a wealthy market. So I think those things play into a landscape where it's perhaps easier for startups to get off the ground. It is easier for people to think about adopting something brand new than perhaps in some other places around the world. So that makes for an interesting landscape. Other than that, I think globally, a lot of the same things are happening, having had conversations.
Yeah, fantastic. Horace, what's unique about the USA?
Hunger for building things, hunger for technology, hunger for just getting things done. But all this hunger is fueled by lots and lots of VC money looking for a home. And so the number of VCs who are out there, in fact, pitching to startups is bizarre and crazy. And it's giving people opportunity because it's giving them fuel. So I think that is probably what's fueling the US movements and momentum at the moment.
I'm packing for the US now, Wendy, so the last word is yours as to whether or not I close the suitcase up or not. Unique about the USA?
I'm packing my bag for Australia. I'm like dying to see you in person, Terry. But we are so crowded and there is so much activity here and there's so much money, but not everybody's going to make it. So there are going to be a lot of lessons coming out of the US. And maybe if I understand in Australia, not everybody's there yet. And so I'd only get 500 calls a day rather than what like 5,000. But I mean, we are going to be the place where I think we see a lot of these issues that we've talked about hit maturity first. Getting there is going to give me more gray hair. But I'll tell you what I learn all day long. Anybody who's listening, call me and we'll happily share our experience. But I guess I'll just close with every time I get to talk to Terry, I get to talk to tomorrow. Every time I talk to Terry, tomorrow's bright. So I would love to come to Australia. I would love to visit tomorrow. And thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. Wendy, Horace, Nikki, thank you for an absolutely amazing discussion. Been just such a pleasure. Thank you again. Bye.
Thanks so much for having us.
Bye.